Hello and welcome to La Excellence, Hyderabad and Bangalore. This is the daily news analysis for 22nd May 2020. The online live general studies batch for 2021 for both prelims and mains has started. Please direct your queries to the numbers given below. As usual, the discussion is divided into deep and the targeted news analysis. The former consists of all the important editorial articles in the newspaper, whereas the remaining important articles of the newspaper will be discussed under TNA or targeted news analysis. The title for the first article of our discussion is Keeping the Peace. The syllabus connection has been listed here for your benefit. Please have a look. The issue is related to India-China relations and the dimension is the boundary disputes across LAC. Before we move into the article, we need to have a brief background about the border disputes that we have with China. Before we see what the border disputes are, we need to identify what the borders are with respect to China, right? Like for example, how many states in India border with China? The answer is 4. Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh are the states which border China. In addition, you also have the Union Territory of Ladakh which shares a border with China. Using these facts, you can also answer a prelims question which asks you to identify the states which border China. So this is the border as you can see in the map given here. Now it is broadly divided into 3 sectors. The western sector, the middle sector and the eastern sector. So the western sector of the border is basically a territory between Ladakh and the Xinjiang province of China. In this sector, there is a territorial dispute over Aksai Chin. So there is a small strip of land called Aksai Chin on which both India and China lay their claim. India says it is a part of erstwhile Kashmir and then China says no, it is a part of Xinjiang. Now this dispute over Aksai Chin can be traced back to the failure of the British Empire as such, because the British Empire was the body which tried to delineate these borders, right? So the British Empire used 2 different commissions, namely the Johnson Commission and the Macdonald Commission. Each of them have basically demarcated their borders. One of these have given Aksai Chin to China and the other has given Aksai Chin to India. So this lack of clarity has led to subsequent problems. Now let's move forward and look at what happens in the middle sector. The middle sector is basically a 625 kilometers long boundary with China which runs along the watershed from Ladakh to Nepal. Now Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand are basically the states which touch the border in the middle sector, and they touch the border with Tibet, of course, which is considered to be a part of China. Now this middle sector as such does not have much disagreement over the border, as in middle sector is largely peaceful, whereas the western and eastern sector are largely volatile. On the western sector you have the Aksai Chin, on the eastern sector you have Doklam and other areas. Now let's move forward and look at what the eastern sector is. The eastern sector runs from Bhutan to a point near Talu Pass at the trijunction of Tibet, Indian and Myanmar, which is to say, if you look at the red line, it runs from Bhutan on one side to Myanmar on the other side. So this whole border we call it as the eastern sector, right? So this boundary is also called as the McMahon line. Now China considers the McMahon line as illegal and unacceptable, and it claims that the Tibetan representatives who signed the 1914 convention were basically forced to sign that agreement. Like for example, this border was delineated in 1914, but at that point of time, Tibet signed the agreement with the British and we are not Tibet, is what is claimed by China. So China basically says when the 1914 agreement was arrived between British and Tibet, China was not involved as such. Tibet was basically arm twisted to delineate the line between China and British India, which gave rise to the McMahon line. So this line is basically not justiciable, it is what China claims. India of course feels otherwise, because India feels that it was done in a legitimate manner. Now moving forward, let's see what this article is trying to tell us. This article is basically related to the recent standoff on the line of actual control in the recent weeks, and this standoff is the largest since the Doklam standoff of 2017. If you can recall, in 2017 there was a huge standoff between India and China in Doklam region near Bhutan. Now since then the tensions have dissipated to a large extent, but now we have highest amount of tensions in the line of actual control is what this article is trying to tell us. The article moves forward and tells us that even though we have tensions, we have to make sure that these tensions should not be allowed to escalate. Okay, so that is what even Prime Minister Modi and the President Xi Jinping also agree upon. They both agree that whatever tensions we have at the border, they should not escalate to the larger arena. And in order to make sure that this happens, a clear message has been sent to the two militaries. Like for example, Indian government has sent a clear message to the military of India, and then Chinese government has sent a clear message to its own military to behave themselves well on the border. So how do we behave well on the border? So that is basically dictated by the rules that we have carved between India and China in 2005 and 2013. So certain standard protocols have been evolved in these particular years, and these standard protocols make sure that the tensions do not escalate beyond a point. So these protocols have to be strictly followed is what the central governments of both the countries has said to their militaries. Now, even though all this is happening, we have to go back a step and visualize why this has come to place. I'll tell you why. So basically you have the disputed region in the western sector, the line of actual control. Yes, in the disputed region, what China has done in the past few years or in the past decade as such is that China has constructed a lot of roads and certain infrastructure projects in this region silently without our notice. At some point of time we did notice, but we didn't do much regarding the same because Chinese construction activity took place at a very fast pace. Now India wants to do the same. India wants to catch up and create some amount of roads for itself in the disputed region. Now this is being contested by China. So China on one hand has created its own roads and so on for its connectivity, for military connectivity and so on. But when it comes to India doing the same thing, China is contesting it and saying, no, this is disputed region, you are not allowed to do it. So this is the basic problem which has given rise to the tensions at the moment. So the article moves forward and says that you have to follow the international principle of right to mutual and equal security of both sides. So if China has done some kind of construction previously for its own security, there has to be some amount of security to India as well, and this should be properly recognized by China is what this article is trying to tell us. Now let's move on to the next article. The title for the present article is A Violation of Right Found but No Remedy Given. The syllabus connection has been listed here for your benefit. Please have a look. The issue is related to the prohibition of the 4G services in Jammu and Kashmir. The dimension is related to the Supreme Court role in enforcement of rights. Supreme Court's role in enforcement of rights. So what is this article related to? This article is related to Kashmir shutdown, and before we look into what this article is trying to tell us, we need to have a brief background about Anuradha Bharshan versus the Union of India case. So this is a case which is very popularly known as the Kashmir Internet Shutdown case. In this particular case, the Supreme Court has said that Article 19 of the Constitution guarantees the freedom of speech. But this freedom of speech is totally being curtailed when you shut down your internet, and this is not conducive to the exercise of the fundamental rights. And also the freedom to practice any profession or carry on any trade, business, etc. over the medium of internet also enjoys constitutional protection. Like for example, if you look at the fundamental rights, there is a right to profession and there is a right to carry out any trade and so on. Now think about all those startups which are primarily based on internet. Now these startups will not be able to continue their jobs, right? So their fundamental right of job is also, right of profession is also being violated when you shut down the internet in a particular state. So based on like this, Supreme Court has given out several criteria, several parameters on which you can say that shutting down internet without proper reason is against the constitution of the country. The Anuradha Vasin case has also said that you have to have proper procedural safeguards while implementing shutdowns. It should not be implemented based on the whims and caprices of the government of the day. There should be a proper method, there should be a proper vision for such shutdowns, is what this particular case has said. Now, keeping this in mind, keeping the context of Anuradha Vasin's case in mind, we will understand what this particular article is trying to tell us. Now, recently there has been a case, there has been a hearing in relation to the 4G internet shutdown in Jammu and Kashmir. As you all know, since the conversion of Jammu and Kashmir into a union territory, there has been an internet shutdown and all kinds of security restrictions are placed in Kashmir. Now, this internet shutdown has been continuing for a long time. Now, the court examined this particular 4G internet shutdown case, and it has been found that this particular shutdown is totally disproportionate. It is quite disproportionate, and even though it is disproportionate, the Supreme Court has not been able to directly provide a remedy. In this particular case of 4G internet shutdown, which we call it as the FMP case, or the Foundation for Media Professional versus the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir case. In this particular FMP case, which was heard by the Supreme Court on May 11th, the Supreme Court has said an executive committee, a committee shall be set up which will be majorly chaired by the executive, and they will decide on the facts of the case, and they will decide whether it is proportional, procedural or not. Now, this is what is being contested by this particular article, because if you are giving the power to the executive to check if the internet shutdown is legal or illegal, the executive will obviously say that it is legal, right? Because here the executive is the person who has enforced that particular rule. Now he is acting as the judge in that particular rule. Now, this is against the age-old rule of justice, which says that no person shall act as a judge in his own cause. And that is what is happening in this particular context, because the Supreme Court has given the powers to decide to an executive committee, and this executive committee is basically a representative of the executive, which has levied the shutdown as such. So there is going to be a conflict of interest, and this is against the canons of Article 32, or the right to constitutional remedies, is what this article says. In fact, this article moves forward and says that the Supreme Court, the judge has to decide based on certain parameters. He has to decide if there were legitimate grounds for shutdown, firstly, and also he has to decide whether it was the least intrusive measure available to the government. As in, was it the least or was it the best possible outcome? Was it having its intended outcome, is what has to be decided by the court, and the court did not do it. And also, in addition to this, you have to see the parameters of balancing the different interests of the society. You cannot take into account national security as the paramount and hurt all other rights of the people in that particular territory. So you have to balance the rights of the people, the rights of the media, the rights of the business interests that are there, and the rights of the national security, even though national security is paramount. So all these things have to be considered by the Supreme Court when it takes into account any particular case. And in order to do so, it has to get into fact finding, it has to get into research, it has to understand what the ground situation in Jammu and Kashmir is. But instead of doing the fact finding itself, the Supreme Court has relegated these powers to the executive by saying that we will form a committee which consists of people from the executive, and they will decide whether the internet shutdown was legal or not. Now, this is a big problem. This is against the concept of judicial review, is what this article says. And this article also says that this particular judgment at this point of time, the FMP judgment, is also against the Anuradha Bhasin's judgment. Like, for example, the Anuradha Bhasin judgment in clear terms, directly or indirectly, has said that the right to internet is basically a part of the fundamental right. If a person wants to live a life of dignity, a life of freedom, if he wants to conduct a business by himself, for all these reasons, he needs the fundamental right to internet, and that is what has been said by the Anuradha Bhasin's case. But the present FMP case is basically negating that particular case, is what this article says. Now this article says that the way forward is that the separation of powers has to be properly delineated and has to be properly followed. The Supreme Court here has basically merged the separation of power by giving the judicial powers to the executive, and this is not good for a democracy, and a strict separation of powers has to be followed, and then we also have to uphold the rule of law. Now this is the gist of the article. Now let's move on to the next article. So the title for the present article is A Double Disaster. The syllabus connection has been listed here for your benefit. Please have a look. The issue is related to the cyclone Umpun, and the dimension is related to the pandemic and cyclone. So let us have a brief background about cyclone Umpun. Cyclone Umpun is a tropical cyclone formed over Bay of Bengal. It has been named by Thailand. Now this cyclone is basically quite typical of what happens in the tropical regions. There are several kinds of names which we have for the tropical cyclones all over the world. Some people in Australia call it as Willy Willy. China calls it as typhoons. When it happens in the Atlantic, it is called as the tornado, and so on. Similarly, what happens in our particular region is called as a cyclone, and that is what is this particular cyclone Umpun. This is a tropical storm. Now what is the procedure of how this particular tropical storm evolves? This is mainly because water evaporates because of very hot ocean surface. Now this particular water which evaporates from the ocean surface, it moves forward, right? Because once water evaporates, it basically becomes lighter, so it rises up. When it rises up, it comes into contact with a mass of cold air at the top, and because of this, it is going to form a cloud. And this cloud is basically going to give you this particular tropical storm, and this is pushed forward by the Coriolis force, as in this is given enough impetus by the Coriolis force to develop into a storm over a low pressure region. So over this low pressure region, because of Coriolis force, you have this particular strong tropical storms. Now this is the basic background of this particular article. Now let's see what this article is trying to tell us. This article basically talks about the present double disaster situation which you witness in West Bengal and Odisha in the form of cyclone Umpun and the COVID-19 disaster. Now if you look at how these two states have been affected, both West Bengal and Odisha, it shows how fragile our eastern coastal states are during the storm season. Now is it because we are not prepared well? No, we have been taking certain amount of measures, a good amount of restrictions to make sure that any particular storm does not affect us in a large manner. But these measures that are being taken are not implemented properly, and this is the major cause of concern at the moment. Now we have reliable forecasts. We have reliable forecasts which basically tell us that yes, look, you are going to have a cyclone in the next 48 hours or maybe 72 hours. Even with this amount of lead time, why are we not able to solve this problem of loss of men and material? This is because the infrastructure that we have to either evacuate people or to provide backup to them or to rescue them, that infrastructure is basically not as responsive as it is supposed to be. But we have a good amount of rules which basically tell us to the dot about what is to be done. Like for example, there is something called a code of practice. So there is a code of practice which has to be followed during a storm. It has a certain set of measures that have to be taken. Firstly, you have to immediately look forward for evacuation. The second thing you have to do is to arrange for backup power. The third thing is to warn the people in the vicinity that there is an incoming cyclone and that they have to brace for impact. The next thing you are supposed to do is to basically designate all the strong buildings that are there in the vicinity. All the strong buildings which are there in the vicinity, they have to be designated as cyclone shelters, because if there is flooding and so on and there are huge wind speeds, you need these strong buildings because they are going to withstand that particular force, and people can be evacuated into these particular shelters for the time being. So now these are the steps that have been listed under the code of practice, but even with these steps, proper measures are not implemented at the ground level. and even if they are implemented, the loss of life is simply too high. It is always significant in every cyclone. This is because there are too many people. There are too many people, and our infrastructure is not scaling itself up in order to solve the problems of these people. Now, Cyclone Amphan has led to a lot of disastrous impact on both men and material in both Odisha and West Bengal. And in such a situation, the central government and the neighboring state governments should basically help the people of that particular region to pick their lives up again. So this kind of support, so this moral, physical support has to be given to these people so that they can come back to the mainstream lives. Now this is the one part of the disaster. The second part of the disaster is what we call the COVID-19. The world itself is basically reeling under the pressure of COVID-19, and West Bengal and Odisha are not any exception. Now the problem is because of Amphan, most of the people who are being evacuated, they are being placed in shelters, but it is happening in a crowded manner. Now when you place people in crowds in a particular shelter, even if one person has COVID in that particular crowd, it is going to spread like anything, simply because it is a virus and because it is a contagious. So this particular state has to face the double disaster of COVID-19, increased impact of COVID-19 on one hand, and also the impact of the cyclone Amphan. In such a situation, both the center and the states have to come forward, put in team effort in order to solve this problem. Most importantly, we have to take certain steps. Firstly, we have to make sure that some form of social distancing is followed. Immediate testing has to be done for all the people who are present in that particular shelter, and certain prefabricated structures have to be constructed in the outlying areas like Sundarbans, so that they can be used as shelter houses, and these prefabricated structures in Sundarbans can be powered by solar power. So these self-sustaining structures can be created in the outlying areas, so these people can be sheltered there. So this is what this article says. Now let's move on to the next article. The title for the next article is Cinema After COVID-19. The syllabus connection is listed here. Please have a look. The issue is related to COVID-19 lockdown, and the dimension is the impact of this lockdown on Indian cinema. So the ongoing COVID-19 crisis, this particular crisis has led to a large-scale anxiety about the future of arts. Many livelihoods basically rely upon performing and visual arts, but these performing and visual arts cannot take off at the moment because of lockdown restrictions. Even if the lockdown restrictions are removed, people will be less forthcoming to go to the places where performing arts are done, because they would be really scared about catching the virus. So let's say the example of a theater. How willing will you be to go to a theater and watch a movie at the moment, even if the lockdown restrictions are removed, right? So this is going to create a trouble, because all those people who are reliant on the performing arts will be facing a problem. For example, and this is definitely difficult for India, because India is the largest film making nation in the world, and this film industry in India, be it Tollywood, Collywood, Bollywood, etc., all these basically provide a lot of jobs to several thousands of people. Now a lot of people are of the opinion that this particular pandemic will significantly impact the viewing of people. People will no longer be enthusiastic to go to the theaters to watch movies, but they would rather stay home and watch through other apps like Hotstar, Netflix, Amazon Prime, and so on. So in order to avoid the large gatherings, one impact COVID-19 is going to have on our particular economy, on the minds of people, as such that we would avoid going to the film theaters for a longer time to come. So in the near future, it will be very difficult for us to go to the theater and watch a movie. Now this will do what? This will basically push the films to shift to an online platform. So if you look at the subscriptions and the incomes of Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hotstar, and so on, they have basically witnessed a record surge of subscriptions during the lockdown. Now this does not mean that everybody has suddenly turned a film lover, but this only means that people have shifted from the offline mode to an online mode because offline mode में कुछ available नहीं है. All the theaters are locked down, all the performing arts places are locked down, so they basically have shifted to the online mode of entertaining themselves. So this online mode is going to receive a large boost, and this is probably the area in which the film sector should focus on. It should probably go for online viewing, online showing of films on a secured platforms or something like that. So online platforms will provide an alternative to the big screen halls. Their reach is of course limited, because if you look at the rural populace or the remote area, they will be better off going and watching the films in the theater because they know what the theaters are. Now if you tell a remote person, a person in a tribal district or maybe in the remote part of the country, if you ask him if he has a Netflix subscription or an Amazon Prime subscription, he will not understand you. But if you ask him where the theater is nearby, he will be able to probably point out. So there are some problems in terms of reach, but the film industry should evolve itself to cater to the online audience at the moment until the lockdown troubles are totally over. This is what this article says. Now let's move on to the next article. So the title for the present article is China Plans Security Law for Hong Kong. The syllabus connection is listed here for your benefit. Please have a look. The issue is related to China-Hong Kong relations, and the dimension is the security law for Hong Kong. Before we jump into the article, we will basically look into what and how China-Hong Kong relations have evolved over a period of time. If you look into history, Hong Kong has been handed back to China by the United Kingdom after 150 years of British rule in 1997. So in 1997, China has been given Hong Kong by the United Kingdom, and since then there is a love-hate relationship between Hong Kong and China. Hong Kong is basically trying to wrest some kind of control, some kind of autonomy, if not complete autonomy from China, and China of course does not like it. So this is the timeline, and if you look at the timeline, this timeline basically tells you the different measures or the steps that have been taken by the authorities in Hong Kong, by the people in Hong Kong, by the people's movements in Hong Kong against China. They want to create some kind of autonomy in Hong Kong. They want a self-government. And this basically defines the relationship between China and Hong Kong at the moment. So in recent times, Hong Kong protests have been increasing over a period of time. Especially in the recent times, you have two major points in April 2019 and June 2019. First is in April 2019, there has been an introduction of extradition bill. And the second point is in June 2019, more than 1 million people marched against this particular legislation of extradition bill, and the bill is halted indefinitely. Without going into the details of this particular move, this basically created a lot of problem for China. This created a lot of issue for China, because of which China is trying to tackle the issue by passing a bill in order to curtail the rights of opposition in Hong Kong. It is basically trying to pass a bill. So the political activity in recent times in Hong Kong, be it in terms of the movements, be it in terms of the people's gatherings that are happening, it is quite subversive is what China feels, and in order to snub this kind of political activity, it has come up with this particular bill. So this legislation was already proposed in 2003, but it was withdrawn due to certain protests. Now China has taken measures like punishment for those who disrespect Chinese national flag and anthem, and it also wants to increase the pro-China patriotic themed education in the schools of Hong Kong. This is the main aim of the bill. This bill is basically trying to curtail the freedom of speech of the people of Hong Kong. It will curtail the freedom of assembly of the people of Hong Kong. This is on one hand. On the other hand, it wants to create a China-friendly attitude in the minds of the young people in Hong Kong, to create more connectivity between Hong Kong and China is what this article is trying to tell us. So the title for the next article is Release Jammu and Kashmir Political Detainees, says CCG. What is the CCG? CCG is basically Concerned Citizens Group, and it is headed by the former Union Finance Minister Mr. Yashwant Sinha. So the syllabus connection is listed here. Please have a look. The issue is related to the situation in Jammu and Kashmir, and the dimension is related to the restrictions in Jammu and Kashmir after the abrogation of Article 370. So this article basically can be seen in the context of the rights of people of the Jammu and Kashmir. So Jammu and Kashmir, as we all know, has been converted from the state to a union territory, right? And in this process there has been a huge uproar, and in order to prevent this from creating any kind of national security issues, we have basically resorted to certain measures. Firstly, we have made sure that the whole state was under lockdown. Secondly, we have made sure that the irresponsible elements in that particular state are basically detained. And nextly, we also made sure that there won't be very strong connectivity by shutting down 4G connectivity and by heavily restricting the 2G and the 3G connectivity. So all these steps were taken in the name of national security, but they have been extended beyond a period of time. They have been extended for a long period of time, and this is creating a dissent not just in the people of Jammu and Kashmir, which has always been there, but it is creating dissent in all those people who would want to fight for the rights of the people. So before we move forward, what is this particular Jammu and Kashmir Public Safety Act? So why are we studying this act? This is the act which is the basis or the foundation for detaining a particular person in Jammu and Kashmir in case he poses a problem. So this is basically a preventive detention law, and it was introduced by the Sheikh Abdullah government in 1978, and this main purpose was to prevent smuggling and to keep smugglers in prison. It is similar to the National Security Act, which was introduced in 1980. So basically the whole idea of arresting someone under this particular act is that you don't have to produce him in court. You do not have to produce him in court. The government can detain a person for 2 years based on the recommendation of an advisory board. Now, in recent times, Union government has used this act to detain political leaders and other political activists. Now, one might ask, this act is related to smuggling as such. Is it possible for states to invoke this law in order to prevent political agitation as such? Yes, it can be done. In fact, there are several laws which are related to terrorism and smuggling, which can be used to detain irresponsible or unwanted, unruly elements in the country as such. It is not strictly right to do so, but it can be done if there is no other preventive detention law in place. So the concept of Jammu and Kashmir Public Safety Act is that it is basically a preventive detention law. So preventive detention law, as we all know, can be legislated both by the center and the state. The center has its own preventive detention law. The states themselves have their own preventive detention laws. This is one of them. So using this particular law, a good number of people have been detained by the government, and this is not right, is what this particular article says. So this article basically talks about the concerns voiced by this particular group called the CCG, or the Concerned Citizens Group. So this particular group basically has pitched for the release of all those people who are detained under the Public Safety Act in Kashmir since the abrogation of Article 370. So look, you have basically detained a lot of people using this Public Safety Act. You have to release these people, because if you do not do so, it would be a violation of their fundamental right to life and dignity. In addition to this, the CCG, or the Concerned Citizen Groups, has also pitched for the creation of grassroots level democracy at the level of the people in Jammu and Kashmir. That is another thing which has been asked by this particular CCG. And nextly, it also demanded the restoration of the 4G connectivity services in the region. Because if you do not have this 4G connectivity and high-speed internet connectivity, at the moment it is basically hurting not just the fundamental right of freedom of expression, but mostly the businesses in the region, right? So all those businessmen, traders, and especially students who are dependent upon 4G services for their education, for their rosy roti, for their money, for their savings, all these are facing trouble. So you have to immediately restore the 4G connectivity services is what this particular CCG has said. So the lockdown of Jammu and Kashmir has led to a lot of steps taken by the central government in order to prevent any national security concerns from arising, but this is violating the rights of the people is what the CCG believes. So the CCG says that you have to release all the political prisoners. Now let's move on to the next article. So the title for the next article is Finance Panel Flags Recovery Uncertainty. The syllabus connection is listed here for your benefit. Please have a look. The issue is related to the 15th Finance Commission and the dimension is related to the observations of the Commission on the growth of the economy. So this article basically talks about the recent points that have been given by the finance panel, which basically says that the recovery of the economy is basically on an uncertain ground. So some background about Finance Commission has been given here. You can see the provisions of the Finance Commission in the Constitution itself. If you look at the Article 280, the Finance Commission is a constitutional body and it is formed by who? It is created by the President of India, and the Finance Commission is a panel. So it basically has a set of members. So these basically suggest on the center state financial relations. Like for example, the center has money, the center receives tax revenue and non-tax revenue. How much of this tax revenue should be given to the states for their own development is what is decided by the Finance Commission. So this particular devolution of funds is done by the Finance Commission. The devolution of taxes, as pointed out here, if you look at this particular small box of information. So the recent 15th Finance Commission has the chairperson as N.K. Singh. So they have given two reports, and the most recent report is basically telling you that we are basically going through a lot of trouble. Now let's move forward and talk about what this particular article is trying to tell us. So the 15th Finance Commission's committee in recent times has said that the fiscal consolidation roadmap is basically very tricky for India because the nominal GDP for the year 2020 to 21, nominal GDP growth in this particular 2020 to 2021, this particular year is minus 6% to 1%, which is to say this is pretty dismal. So before COVID-19, were we doing really well? No, even before COVID-19, the projected growth rate was only about 4.5%, but that was still better than what is being projected right now. Yes, because of COVID-19, the economic activity is in shambles, and so the projected growth rate is minus 6% to 1%, which is to say the economy is probably and is most likely going to contract. Now the committee says there is a high level of uncertainty because of the pandemic that their economy is going to recover anytime soon. So the economic recovery is going to face a problem is what this article says. This article quotes the Finance Commission report. So this finance panel, which is a part of the Finance Commission, has said that the economic recovery is basically very difficult. Now recently the government, as we all know, has issued something called as ABA. Right? What is this ABA? ABA is Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. The Commission says that these reforms are aimed to increase growth rate to around 8%. The Commission is hopeful that this will increase the growth rate to 8%, but it will be done in the medium term and the long term. So in the long run, the reforms of Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan will probably increase the growth of the country, but who will take care of the economy in the short run? Who will take care of the economy when it is going through a crunch in the short run, especially immediately after this COVID-19? Right. In addition to this article basically also talks about the discussions in relation to National Health Service and the National Health Service, which basically allows the final year MBBS students to begin practicing in some areas. Now, looking at the situations like COVID, and because experts are saying that COVID-like situations are going to emerge in a large manner in times to come, the Finance Commission also mooted the concept of National Health Service, in which students of final year MBBS will also be allowed to practice in certain health sectors. Now that is what this article says. This is the final article of the discussion. I'll show you the prelims questions. So these are the prelims questions. The one is a geography based question. It wants you to place the territories from east to west. I want you to go back and look into the map, answer the question and put your answers in the comment section. Also answer this question as well. Now this should be the discussion for the day. We'll meet again.